So, today I will be talking a little bit about one of the most influential female literary journalists, Susan Orlean. So, Susan Orlean was born on October 31st in 1955. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and she was born into a Jewish family, and her father worked as an attorney and a businessman. So after high school, she attended the University of Michigan, where she studied literature and history. And when Orlean was in college, she already knew that she wanted to write, but she didn't think that it was feasible for her. So instead, she planned on attending law school. Um, so after college, she moved to Portland, Oregon. And it was actually in Portland where she got her first job as a writer at a small monthly magazine. And so she wouldn't have to go to law school after all. She then started to write some small music reviews and feature stories at a local news weekly. She would eventually move on to Public Stories and Rolling Stone, The Village Voice, Esquire, and some other pretty prominent publications. And then in 1982, she moved to Boston and started to work for the Boston Phoenix and the Boston Globe. And this was where she started writing her very first book, Saturday Night. And so the book documented and explored a bunch of people's lives on their different Saturday nights throughout the country in over 20 different communities. And then she eventually moved to New York and started to work for The New Yorker. And this was also where she wrote her second book, The Orchid Thief, which details an eccentric plant seller, and it dives into a whole hidden culture of these rare orchid poachers and all things that hadn't really been talked about before, but Susan Orlean kind of attacked that. And so she has published many books since The New Yorker, and so some of her most prominent pieces are The Bullfighter Checks Her Makeup, which was basically a collection of all of her favorite different profile pieces that she wrote. And then she published Rin Tin Tin, The Life and the Legend, which showed the true story behind the adventures of Rin Tin Tin. And the library book, which she told of basically the largest library fire in U.S. history at the LA Public Library. So many different prominent writers and experts have spoken on Susan Orlean. Ted Conover actually described her work as whimsical yet sophisticated, and he pointed out that her pieces are full of empathy for people that you might not usually have thought of empathetically. So Conover said that even if he or anyone was given 30 pieces of work, one could easily find hers, and it would just be because of her tendency to keep such a narrow focus. And he also commended her ability to have such a lightly first-person narration, saying that she would include only small mentions of herself, but in a powerful way. And so despite her works only having her mentioned a few times, they're infused with her personality. And so returning to talking about the library book, which I'll actually talk about a lot during this because it is one of her most influential pieces, Michael Lewis actually wrote a very positive review on the book for the New York Times book review. And he also pointed out her ability to take topics and people that people usually overlook and turn them into fascinating stories. And he just said that Orlean is a perfect example of someone who's passionate enough and talented enough in their writing that they can provide enough drama in the story from just their own emotion. And that's a trait that's very valuable in this specific type of journalism. Then we also have Barbara King. She is an anthropologist and actually a writer for NPR. And she had a bit more of a negative outlook on Orlean's writing. So while she does not deny the superior skill and prose of Orlean's writing, and what is necessary. She's more worried about the content and the explanation of her pieces, especially regarding animals. So Orlean wrote many, many books about animals, and they're almost all focused around what they provide to people, including Orlean, in terms of entertainment, food, money. And so King sort of questions this duality of Orlean's pieces on animals, talking about how much she loves them while also participating in and ultimately writing about and benefiting off of their exploitation. So King even suggested, somewhat jokingly, somewhat seriously, the changing of Orlean's book on animals, which was a collection of stories, to be titled On Animals Used or Exploited by Humans, as a more accurate title. And then another expert who spoke on some of Orlean's work is writer and researcher Debbie Quinn. So she did nothing but commend Orlean for her writing, specifically the library book. So Quinn pointed out that despite the book is nonfiction, Orlean is capable of weaving in enough small, intriguing moments and stories that make it so much more enthralling and emotional. And Quinn also emphasized the way that Orlean writes her characters, drawing attention to people who may have gone unnoticed, but actually provide a really unique perspective on her stories. And so, I mean, for example, Orlean even burned a book herself to get a better view of what was happening inside that library. Not like one book burning would be comparable, but she wanted to get that extra perspective just to go the extra mile. And so I actually wanted to include what is possibly one of Orlean's most referenced passages, and it's actually written in the library book, which, like I said, we're going to be talking about a lot, so I'll go ahead and read that passage now. So, in Senegal, the polite expression for saying someone died is to say his or her library has burned. When I first heard the phrase, I didn't understand it, but over time, I came to realize it was perfect. Our minds and souls contain volumes inscribed by our experiences and emotions. Each individual's consciousness is a collection of memories we've cataloged and stored inside us, a private library of a life lived. So one thing that I've noticed about Orlean's writing is her ability to weave in the extra details and give phrases more emotion by this light first-person narration, where she brings in just enough perspective to get the reader wrapped up in the story. And the way that this passage is strung together is also very typical. So, like, for example, in this book especially, she says we a lot. And these are our memories that we have cataloged and stored. And this draws more feeling from the reader because it ties everyone to this moment and it relates it to them. And her style of writing just makes the message that much more powerful and impactful. So Jan Witt, she is a journalist and a professor, and she believes that new journalism cannot be discussed thoroughly without at least a mention of Orlean. So her nonfiction novels are all perfect examples of how literary journalists need to tie in that extra detail and voice, according to Witt, even if it may seem unnecessary in hard news. So while Witt also praised Orlean on her ability to write features, because most of her work falls under what we would consider news features on different people. And so that's really one of Orlean's biggest strengths, her ability to capture these characters and capture these people and capture everything and just make it